There is a psychological behavior that signals someone has chosen you as their target. Carl Jung discovered this pattern in his most dangerous patients, the ones who destroyed lives while looking completely innocent. This isn't just bullying or conflict. This is a subconscious mechanism that Jung identified, something far more sinister than simple cruelty. What makes this deadly is how subtle it appears. It often looks like concern. It sounds like someone trying to help you. But underneath that caring surface lies a targeting system so precise, so unconscious, that the person doing it genuinely believes they're the good guy. Today, I'm going to show you the exact sign to watch for, because once you see it, you'll understand why Jung said immediate withdrawal is your only protection. The specific behavior Jung identified is this: absolute conviction without evidence. When someone accuses you of motivations you don't have with 100% certainty, they don't say "I think" or "maybe." They declare what you are, what you feel, what you secretly want, with complete confidence. And here's the disturbing part. No amount of explanation can shake their belief. You could show them proof. You could bring witnesses. You could open your entire life to inspection. None of it matters. Their certainty is immune to reality. Jung documented this pattern across hundreds of cases in his clinical practice. He noticed that his most dangerous patients all shared this one trait. They could describe others with absolute certainty while remaining completely blind to their own motivations. When Jung would gently suggest that perhaps their perception might be distorted, they would become defensive or even aggressive. The suggestion that they might be wrong threatened their entire psychological structure, because if they were wrong about you, they might have to look at themselves, and that's the one thing their unconscious mind is organized to prevent. This is shadow projection at its most dangerous level. But before we go further, you need to understand something crucial. You are not the target because you're weak. You're not chosen because you did something wrong. In fact, Jung discovered the opposite. You become the target specifically because you are differentiated, because you are psychologically developed in ways that make you a mirror. You reflect back the parts of them they cannot accept, the parts they've buried so deep they don't even know they exist anymore. Think about how a mirror works. It shows you exactly what's there. It doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It simply reflects reality. Now, imagine someone who has spent their entire life constructing a false image of themselves. Someone who believes they are kind when they're actually cruel. Someone who thinks they're honest when they constantly deceive. Someone who considers themselves selfless while acting purely out of self-interest. What happens when this person encounters a mirror? They don't see their real self. They see a threat. They see an enemy. They see someone who must be destroyed. That's you. You're not doing anything to them. You're simply being yourself. But your authentic presence, your psychological awareness, your refusal to participate in collective delusions, all of this acts as a mirror. And people with large, unintegrated shadows cannot tolerate mirrors, so they attack, not consciously, because that would require self-awareness they don't possess, but unconsciously, with absolute conviction that they're right and you're wrong. Jung called this the shadow. Every human being has one. It's the collection of traits, impulses, and qualities we reject about ourselves, the things we can't admit we're capable of. For most people, the shadow stays hidden. But when someone with a large, unintegrated shadow meets someone like you, someone who unconsciously reminds them of what they've denied, something dangerous happens. The projection trap activates. Here's how it works. If they call you manipulative, they are the one manipulating. If they accuse you of being selfish, they are acting selfishly. If they claim you're cruel, look closely at their behavior. You'll find the cruelty there. This isn't a coincidence. This is psychological law. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we must see in others, and we must see it with absolute certainty, because doubt would force us to look inward. That's the one thing the unconscious mind will not allow. But the projection itself is only the beginning. The real danger comes next. Jung documented what he called collective possession. The projector doesn't keep their distorted view to themselves. They recruit others. They gather what some people call flying monkeys or enablers. They begin sharing their concerns about you. Always from a place of apparent care, of course. They're worried about you. They've noticed troubling patterns. They just want to help. And here's what makes this so effective. They genuinely believe what they're saying. There's no conscious deception. They really are worried. They really do see you as the problem, which means they speak with authentic concern, and that authenticity is convincing. People trust genuine emotion, so when the projector expresses heartfelt worry about your behavior, others listen. They start to wonder. They start to look at you differently. They start to see what the projector sees, even though what the projector sees is just their own shadow. Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. Jung observed that this process often happens faster than you can respond to it. By the time you realize you're being discussed, talked about, analyzed behind your back, the narrative is already set. People have already formed opinions. They've already decided who you are based on someone else's projection, and now you're in the impossible position of trying to prove a negative, trying to demonstrate that you're not what they say you are, trying to defend against accusations so vague and subjective that there's no way to disprove them. This is where the isolation begins. One by one, people in your social circle start seeing you through the projector's lens, not because of anything you've done, but because human beings are wired for social cohesion. When someone presents their projections with conviction, others experience psychological pressure to align. It's easier to agree than to stand alone. Easier to see what everyone else claims to see than to trust your own contradictory observations. Jung observed this pattern destroying families, workplaces, entire communities. The target finds themselves increasingly alone, defending against accusations that seem to multiply. And here's the truly insidious part: the gaslighting effect. When enough people tell you that you are something you know you're not, you start to question your own sanity. You start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are the problem. Maybe your perception of yourself has been wrong all along. This is what Jung called the reality distortion field. The projector creates an alternate reality that feels completely real to them and increasingly real to everyone around them. Meanwhile, you're trapped in the center, experiencing a sensation that Jung's patients described consistently. The feeling of being hunted, not physically, but psychologically. Like there's a target on your back that only certain people can see. Your nervous system picks it up before your conscious mind does. You feel anxious around them for no clear reason. You second-guess everything you say. You start walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger the next accusation. But nothing you do makes a difference, because this isn't about your actual behavior. This is about their shadow, and the shadow always finds what it's looking for. Jung wrote extensively about this phenomenon in his work on psychological projections. He noted that the target often develops physical symptoms: insomnia, digestive issues, chronic fatigue. Your body is responding to a threat that your mind can't fully name. Because how do you explain to someone that you're being psychologically hunted? How do you describe the sensation of having someone's unconscious shadow material projected onto you with such force that it starts to feel like maybe it's true? How do you articulate the experience of watching a group of people organize around a completely false narrative about who you are? Most people can't. So they suffer in silence. They blame themselves. They wonder what they did wrong. They try harder to be good, to be acceptable, to be whatever they think will make the projection stop. But it never stops, because the projection has nothing to do with you and everything to do with what the projector cannot face in themselves. Now we reach the most dangerous phase, when the target starts believing the lies. This is the moment Jung feared most in his clinical work, when someone who has been relentlessly projected upon begins to internalize the projections. They start to think, maybe I am manipulative, maybe I am selfish, maybe I am the villain in this story. Once that happens, the psychological damage can take years to undo. But there's another layer to this that Jung discovered, something even more disturbing. In many cases, you weren't randomly selected as the target. You were chosen because the group needed a scapegoat. Family systems, workplace cultures, social circles, they all have shadow material they cannot consciously acknowledge, dysfunction they cannot admit, problems they cannot face. And when a system needs to avoid its own darkness, it requires someone to carry that burden. That someone is you. Not because you're actually dysfunctional, but because you're different enough to be believable as the problem. Maybe you're more sensitive. Maybe you're more aware. Maybe you see things others prefer to ignore. Whatever the reason, you've been assigned a role in a psychological drama that started long before you arrived. The scapegoat, the identified patient, the one who carries what the collective refuses to carry. Jung documented how this works in family systems especially. One child becomes the problem child, while the parent's marriage crumbles. One employee becomes the difficult one, while the company's leadership fails. One member of the friend group becomes the drama magnet, while everyone else's dysfunction stays hidden. The system maintains its fragile balance by sacrificing you. And here's what makes it almost impossible to escape. The more you try to prove your innocence, the more guilty you appear. The more you defend yourself, the more defensive you seem. Every attempt to correct their misperceptions becomes evidence that you're exactly what they say you are. You're trapped in a psychological double bind. Speak up and confirm their projections. Stay silent and accept their projections. There is no winning move within their framework. Jung called this the defense trap. He observed it repeatedly in his practice. A patient would come to him, desperate to prove that their family's perception of them was wrong. They would bring evidence. They would explain situations. They would detail their actual motivations. And Jung would have to tell them the hardest truth in psychology. Your defense doesn't matter, because you're not dealing with a rational evaluation of your behavior. You're dealing with someone's unconscious need to not see their own shadow. And unconscious needs are immune to logic. Think about what happens when you defend yourself against a false accusation. You say, no, that's not true. Here's what really happened. What does the projector hear? They hear you denying their reality. They hear you invalidating their perception. They hear you attacking their sense of truth. So what do? They double down. They become more certain. They gather more allies. They find more evidence to support their view. Your defense becomes the very thing that strengthens their conviction. This is why Jung emphasized that defending yourself against shadow projection is worse than useless. It's actively harmful to you. Every time you defend, you give the projection more energy. You validate its importance. You show that it has power over you. And in doing so, you trap yourself deeper in a dynamic that was designed to be inescapable. This is the clarity event Jung talked about. The moment when the target realizes they cannot fix this by being nicer, by explaining themselves better, by trying harder to be understood. None of that works when you're dealing with unconscious shadow projection combined with collective possession. The person projecting isn't making a conscious choice to misunderstand you. Their entire psychological system is organized around not seeing their own shadow, which means they must see it in you instead. Understanding this changes everything, because once you recognize what's happening, you stop trying to convince them. You stop defending yourself against accusations that have nothing to do with reality. You stop participating in a game where the rules are designed to make you lose. This is the moment of true clarity, the moment you realize that their perception of you is not your responsibility. Their shadow is not yours to integrate. Their unconscious material is not yours to carry. But knowing this intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. Most targets of shadow projection spend months or years trying to make the projector see reason, trying to make the group acknowledge the truth, trying to restore their reputation. And every attempt fails because you cannot use logic to solve an unconscious problem. You cannot use evidence to change a belief that wasn't formed by evidence in the first place. So what's the solution? How do you escape the crosshairs once you've been targeted? Jung's answer was radical. Psychological withdrawal, not necessarily physical distance, though sometimes that's required, but psychological withdrawal, the ability to detach from their narrative about you, to stop caring whether they understand, to release your need for their validation or approval. This sounds simple, but it requires something most people find almost impossible: letting go of the need to be seen accurately. We all want to be understood. We all want others to recognize who we really are. But when you're dealing with shadow projection, that desire becomes your vulnerability. Because as long as you need them to see you correctly, you remain emotionally dependent on their perception. You give them power over your inner world. And that power is what keeps the projection alive. Jung taught his patients something that sounds counterintuitive. To become psychologically invincible, you must accept the bad traits they accuse you of. Not because those traits are actually true, but because once you integrate your own shadow, their accusations lose power. If someone calls you selfish, and you've already acknowledged that yes, like every human being, you have selfish impulses, their accusation can't wound you. You've already made peace with that part of yourself. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine someone accuses you of being manipulative. If you've spent your whole life believing you're purely authentic and never manipulative, this accusation cuts deep. It threatens your self-image. So you defend vigorously. You explain all the ways you're not manipulative. You prove your good intentions. And in doing so, you reveal that the accusation has power over you. The projector sees this, and unconsciously, they push harder on that exact button. But what if you've done shadow work? What if you've already acknowledged that yes, you are capable of manipulation? Every human being is. You've influenced people. You've presented yourself in certain ways to get certain results. You've emphasized some truths and downplayed others. This doesn't make you evil, it makes you human. But once you've integrated this capacity, once you've accepted that manipulation is part of the human shadow you carry, something shifts. When someone accuses you of being manipulative, you can respond with genuine curiosity instead of defense. You might even agree. Yes, I suppose in that situation, I was trying to influence the outcome. Interesting observation. Watch what happens when you respond like this. The projector doesn't know what to do. They expected defense. They expected denial. They expected the emotional charge that would confirm their projection. Instead, they encounter someone who has already made peace with their own complexity. Someone who doesn't need to be seen as purely good. Someone who has integrated their shadow enough to acknowledge uncomfortable truths without shame. This response doesn't feed the projection, it deflates it. This is shadow integration, the process of consciously acknowledging every quality you're capable of, even the ones you don't like, even the ones you've spent your whole life denying. Because here's what Jung discovered. The qualities we deny are the ones that control us. The traits we refuse to acknowledge are the ones that leak out unconsciously. And the aspects of ourselves we cannot accept are the ones others can use to manipulate us. But when you integrate your shadow, when you can honestly say, yes, I am capable of being selfish, cruel, manipulative, dishonest, just like every other human being, something shifts. The projector's words bounce off, not because you're defending against them, but because you're no longer afraid of them. You've already looked at your own darkness. You've already accepted your own capacity for what Jung called evil. So when someone tries to project their shadow onto you, there's nothing for it to stick to. This is psychological invincibility, not the absence of darkness, but the integration of it, not the denial of your shadow, but the conscious relationship with it. Jung believed this was the most important work any human being could do. Because an integrated shadow doesn't go away, it becomes a source of power. The very traits you were taught to reject become fuel for your strength. But integration requires something most people avoid: brutal honesty with yourself, the willingness to see that you are not the purely good person you want to believe you are. You are human, which means you contain every quality you see in others. The difference is whether you acknowledge it consciously or deny it and let it run your life unconsciously. Jung's patients who integrated their shadows reported something remarkable. They stopped being targets, not because they changed their behavior, but because their energy changed. Projectors could no longer find purchase. Their accusations slid off. The reality distortion field couldn't take hold. This is the transformation from victim to observer. When you can watch someone project their shadow onto you with genuine curiosity instead of defensiveness, you've stepped out of their psychological jurisdiction. You're no longer participating in their unconscious drama. You're simply witnessing it. And witnessing, Jung discovered, is one of the most powerful things a human being can do, because when you witness without judgment, something interesting happens. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the projector's own consciousness starts to shift. They begin to sense that their projections aren't landing, that you're not reacting the way targets are supposed to react. And in that gap, in that space where their projection meets your integrated self and finds nothing to grab onto, awareness can emerge. Not your job to make it happen, not your responsibility to enlighten them, but sometimes your integration creates a possibility for theirs. Jung documented several cases where this exact phenomenon occurred. A patient who had been the family scapegoat for decades did deep shadow work. They integrated the parts of themselves they had denied. They stopped defending against their family's projections. And something remarkable happened. The family system began to destabilize. Without a scapegoat to carry the shadow, family members started having to face their own issues. Some did. Some found a new scapegoat. But the patient, the one who had done the integration work, was finally free. Free not because the family changed, but because they changed their relationship to the family's projections. This is what Jung meant by psychological freedom. It's not about controlling what others think or say about you. It's not about convincing them to see you accurately. It's about becoming so solid in your own self-knowledge that their misperceptions simply don't matter anymore. They can believe whatever they need to believe. You know who you are, and that knowing is unshakable because it's based on honest self-examination, not on denial or defense. More often, though, the projector simply moves on to a new target, someone whose shadow is less integrated, someone who will react with the defensiveness and desperation that feeds the projection. And you know what? That's okay, because your job was never to fix them. Your job was never to make them see truth. Your job was always just this: to know yourself so completely that no one else's story about you can shake that knowing. This is what Jung meant when he said, some people either get destroyed by their awareness or transformed into something extraordinary. The people who see through shadow projection have a choice. Let it break them. Let the gaslighting and isolation and collective possession crush their sense of self, or use it as an invitation to integrate, to become so psychologically whole that projection simply doesn't work anymore. If you've experienced what I'm describing, if you've felt that sensation of being targeted for reasons you couldn't understand, if you've watched a group turn against you based on accusations that had no connection to reality, I want you to understand something. You're not crazy. You're not the problem. You were selected precisely because your presence threatened an unconscious system that required a scapegoat to function. And that system will continue requiring scapegoats until enough individuals choose integration over projection. But you cannot integrate their shadow for them. You cannot make them see what they're doing. You cannot convince a group possessed by collective unconsciousness to wake up through logic or evidence or emotional appeals. All you can do is withdraw your energy from their drama. All you can do is integrate your own shadow so completely that their projections have nowhere to land. All you can do is become so psychologically solid that their reality distortion field cannot touch your core. This is the path Jung mapped for his patients who survived shadow projection. Not fighting back, not defending, not trying to win a game where the rules are rigged, but integration, shadow work, the brutal, honest, transformative process of becoming whole. And wholeness, Jung discovered, is the only true protection against psychological attack. Because you cannot be wounded by accusations you've already made peace with. You cannot be destroyed by darkness you've already embraced as part of being human. So if you've ever felt targeted like this, if you recognize the absolute conviction without evidence, the immunity to contradictory facts, the recruitment of others into a distorted view of you, the gaslighting that made you question your own sanity, know this: you were chosen as a mirror. And mirrors are dangerous to people who cannot bear to see themselves. But you don't have to shatter because they threw stones. You can simply refuse to reflect their shadow anymore. You can choose integration over victimhood, wholeness over wounds. And when you make that choice, when you do the shadow work that Jung believed was essential for psychological survival, you become something the projector cannot touch. Not because you're perfect, not because you have no darkness, but because you've looked at your darkness directly. You've integrated what they still deny, and that integration is your freedom. That wholeness is your power. That self-knowledge is your shield. Let me tell you what happens after integration. After you've done the work of accepting your full humanity, darkness, and light together, you start to notice something strange. The people who used to trigger you don't anymore. The accusations that used to wound you bounce off. The social dynamics that used to trap you become transparent. You can see exactly what's happening psychologically. You understand the game, but you're no longer interested in playing. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. Jung was very clear about this. Integration doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes you more discerning. You can still love people. You can still care about them. But you no longer sacrifice your psychological integrity to maintain relationships built on projection and denial. You no longer twist yourself into knots trying to be acceptable to people who need you to be their scapegoat. You simply withdraw your energy from dynamics that require you to be less than whole. And here's what Jung promised his patients. Once you reach this level of integration, once you become truly psychologically sovereign, you attract different people. You start connecting with others who have also done their shadow work, others who can meet you in authenticity instead of projection, others who don't need you to carry their unconscious material. These relationships feel different. easier, more real, because they're based on two integrated people choosing to connect, not on unconscious needs and projections. This is the gift hidden in being targeted. It forces you to do the psychological work that most people avoid their entire lives. It pushes you toward integration whether you want it or not, because staying in the victim role becomes too painful. Defending yourself becomes too exhausting. Eventually, you're left with only one choice: do the shadow work, integrate, become whole, or stay trapped in a dynamic designed to slowly destroy your sense of self. If this video helped you understand what you've been experiencing, comment below and let me know you see the pattern. And if you want to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological patterns that most people miss, make sure you subscribe. Because understanding shadow projection is just the beginning. There's an entire world of psychological wisdom waiting for those brave enough to look. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.